Welcome to Unlayered. I'm your host, Saul, and today it's just me, joined by Matty Taylor, co-founder and general partner at Colosseum, and previously, Matty was head of growth at Solana Foundation. Matty, how's it going, man? Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Sal. Happy to be here and share what we're doing at Colosseum and just what's going on in the Solana ecosystem generally. So happy to jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of tee up this whole topic, even dating back to the days when Solana was down, post FTX, price was down, all that good stuff. One of the shining lights, so to speak, in the ecosystem was the high participation rate in hackathons. And it's something I've said before in podcasts, putting butts in seats is really hard to fake. You can't fake that. It's not like TVL. It's not like, some giant ecosystem fund. That requires a lot of people to believe in something and to spend all of their time, traveling to these events and working on really awesome projects. So that's always been a signal for me that this ecosystem of Solana is very vibrant in spite of what the price might say. And I think that's something you've seen literally firsthand, Matty, in organizing a lot of these previous hackathons during your time at Solana Foundation, and now transitioning to this new endeavor of yours, Colosseum. So maybe we should start there. What is Colosseum?
For sure. So Colosseum is 3 integrated pillars. So it's the online hackathons. These are sort of the bread and butter of how we've been growing the startup ecosystem and developer ecosystem on Solana. Headed up those programs since the beginning in 2020. So structurally, that'll be pretty much the same. Obviously, we have a dedicated team focused on this full time. So we've built out a platform to run these things, and hopefully we'll have a lot more improvements around the structure going forward. What's new is the other 2 pieces, which is the accelerator. So we will basically be inviting the top 10 to 15 winners from each hackathon into our accelerator program, and then investing through a venture fund that we've raised. And we'll be investing in them at the pre-seed and helping them get to the point through the accelerator program where they've gone from sort of DevNet, where they end up at the hackathon, hopefully getting closer to mainnet, and being ready to basically pitch seed investors through a demo day at the end of the program. So holistically, that's what it is. And then I think the other big piece of it, which I kind of alluded to earlier, which is the platform. So we've actually built out this product that is going to house all 3 kind of components, where it's where teams are finding their co-founders, ideating on products. So you can sign up for a Colosseum account today and start finding your people and finding your idea. It's where the hackathons will be administered. So this is where you're going to be submitting your projects. And then it's also where the accelerator program experience is centered. So we have a private part of the application where there's a variety of value add features that we can't really talk about publicly, but they're going to be very valuable to the founders going through our program. So hopefully it kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing at Colosseum.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's super helpful. I think in a lot of ways it echoes what YC did back in the day with startups, and even to this day with their accelerator. And even, for instance, Richard and Ilya of Tensor, they met through YC co-founder, that online matching tool. And so I think there's a lot of value in embracing, one, the remote nature of this industry where everyone's kind of distributed, and creating some tooling, whether it's the online hackathons or, this whole stack you're alluding to, that third pillar. And to clarify on the investment side, are you guys strictly pre-seed and kind of allocating through that accelerator program, or would that eventually branch out to a general kind of venture strategy?
No. So this kind of connects to you mentioned YC and the comparisons there, which we've heard a lot. I think I guess the best way to think about Colosseum and our investment strategy is we run these online global competitions known as hackathons. This is how we basically bring new developers and founders into the Solana ecosystem, but it's also how we evaluate talent and choose, which founders to underwrite. So we basically are using the hackathon as our evaluation process for who we underwrite. And that's kind of what we're focused on. So you can think of it as sort of YC for Solana, except instead of a college-style written application, you got to go win our 5-week online hackathon. So we feel it's more of like a proof of work kind of let's see what you can do process of choosing winners and ultimately investing in them.
Gotcha. No, it's super interesting. I've done hackathons before. Certainly more so before COVID, when I
Mhm.
think online hackathons have been around forever, but I think they really caught steam after like the remote world we entered of COVID. Tell me about like the differences between running something that's an online hackathon versus in person, and I'll kind of caveat with the obvious stuff, which is when you have an in-person hackathon with a specific kind of set of tracks and you time box it, like literally you only have a week or so or 3 days in person to like put something together, and in a sense that gives you a very, very clear signal how quickly someone can put a product together. With online it's a little bit different, I think, where it's much longer time horizons. You could conceivably make an entire working product at that point, if you're talking 5 weeks plus. Does the evaluation kind of change with that in mind? How do you kind of even think about online versus, I guess, the previous way of doing them?
Yeah, I mean, we could spend a whole podcast just talking about sort of the structural kind of evolution of what people call a hackathon.
Yeah.
But I think just TLDR, historically, yes, hackathons have been kind of seen as in-person events that happen over the course of 24 to 48 hours. You drink a bunch of Red Bull, eat a bunch of pizza,
Mm.
hack together, with some friends, a proof of concept, and it's very much an ephemeral sort of experience where it gets people interested in a new technology. There's often sponsors who are usually companies that want their technology being used in products.
Right.
And so there's usually like bounties about specific products or integrations that sponsors want to see as part of those events. And so that those have served like a very important kind of pillar in and modern engineering culture, I would say. Like you hear whether it's a university computer lab or a company holding one in their cafeteria, these are something that engineers, software developers, even hardware developers really like to engage with. However, the problem with them and where our kind of when we started these online hackathons, in the Solana ecosystem, the purpose wasn't to have something ephemeral. The purpose was to attract people that wanted to use these events as their first engineering sprint to go launch an actual product and build that product after the event, raise seed funding, and ultimately get on chain usage through their products. And so that forced us to sort of restructure how people thought about hackathons, which is what we have, what Colosseum is doing today and what we've been doing for the last couple of years at the Solana Foundation. And so I guess to say is that obviously one, they're online, so they're much longer, as you pointed out. Like there's only so much you can build in 48 hours versus a
Yeah.
5-week hackathon. It's much more akin to what an actual engineering sprint is like. Two, there's no specific bounties. So this is something we've kind of cut away over time where we want developers and founders to bring in their own creative ideas to pursue, what they want to build over the next decade, essentially. It's what you're looking for in terms of commitment of a new founding team. And so that's something that we're looking for. And then it's who we choose as winners, right? Like, I think this is something that's somewhat controversial about how we've been running these competitions is that they're not purely engineering, competitions. It's not who's built the most complex integration with Solana, or it's not who's wrote the most code over the course of 5 weeks. It has to be first a viable business idea in the first place. So that's first and foremost like what we're looking for in terms of like awarding prizes to winners. And then obviously there's the engineering component. There's the GitHub repo. Like how did you prioritize? How did you structure your sprint? What is this DevNet demo that you've actually produced to realize this further product vision of what you want to build over the next few years? And so I think it's both an engineering and a business competition kind of bundled into one, and that's how we've structured it.
Gotcha. And it feels to me like this structure you guys have landed on is going to increase in adoption, even outside of crypto, just broadly, as tech takes over the world and more builders come out there. So it makes a lot of sense. I think that analogy you made with like you're kind of structuring it as an engineering sprint, 5 or 6 weeks or so, that also makes sense. I guess my question then is, if the goal is to launch a startup company out of this, what we find oftentimes is it takes a year, maybe even 2 years to even hit PMF with a startup. Um, and so I guess historically what investors might evaluate is just the team, what skill sets they have, how well they work together. um, and not necessarily like over indexing to, I guess, the idea or the project, because oftentimes that changes or pivots pretty substantially over time. And so how do you guys factor that into your decision making when awarding prizes or deciding who to bring on into the accelerator, or does that even factor at all?
It definitely factors in. Like, I think you're right. Like, it takes teams, a year, 2 years to even find product market fit if they're successful. But the process in which you actually find product market fit is more of characteristics of the team themselves. Like, how quickly are they shipping? How are they prioritizing what to build? And are they iterating just very, very, very fast in cycles to find that product market fit through customer feedback? And so that's what we want to. That's why the hackathon is so important for us in our evaluation. Is it sort of mimics in a time box frame how teams work together, how founders go pursue their product. And so I think a good example that we've given, many teams have kind of gone through the same process, but Tensor is a good example where they entered multiple different hackathons, right? And you could just see them sprinting, iterating on different products, explaining through their product pitch at the end of hackathons why they went that direction. And then you could see them get to the point where they, what the product they have today, which everyone knows about, and they won for that product in one of the hackathons. And so we want to see that type of kind of progress of exploring the idea maze, and also just like the way in which they approach their engineering sprint and demo creation. And so that's something that we watch very, very closely in these competitions, and that's how we choose winners.
Awesome. And one other point you brought up earlier that I wanted to talk about a bit is this idea of not over prescribing what people should work on. And this has been a problem when I did hackathons back in like 2018, 2019. There's like 30 sponsors and they all had the bounties, like you said. And then what you end up seeing on the stage is like some hodgepodge of like, hey, you log in with magic, and then, you it's by the way, that has to do with the environment. So we're going to check that box. And
Yeah.
and then you just see all these random vendors. Oh yeah, we use this one tiny feature, uses Chainlink for the Oracle. So we know we check that box. And then it's just a product no one wants. And the vendors, it doesn't even look that good for them. It's not really shilling their product either. And I feel like this is kind of a challenge. Just I don't think it's going away just because there's so much infra and L1s and L2s that are begging for developers. And if you're, the 30th ranked L2, are you really gonna organically find people to build on you, or you're gonna have to go to these hackathons and sponsor them and put out some carrots for people to build on? And so with that in mind, like that kind of trend, it's great to see you guys want to just clear up the creativity in the design space for people. But in that vein, though, I think perhaps you guys do have some ideas on areas of crypto that could be enhanced by Solana or just broadly putting stuff on chain. And so are there specific tracks or just ways of thinking to help people structure what to work on?
Yes. So yeah, I think your point about your previous experience with hackathons is kind of analogous to why an accelerator like YC has succeeded over like the incubator model, right? Where incubators are like you're given ideas. There's like maybe even smart VCs who, or at least they think they're smart, have an idea. They find like some really, crack engineers, and then they like tell them what to go build. That almost never works. That's why incubators have been not very successful, versus YC was kind of one of the first accelerators to be like, we're not going to tell you what to build. Just come with what, problems you want to solve that you want to commit your time to over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's much more of a sustainable model in our opinion. And that's why we've sort of adopted this model with the hackathons. But to answer your question, we do think market generally is important. And so we do have prize tracks that sort of mimic, broad use case verticals that we're interested in. So we have a DeFi track, we have a DePIN track, we have a gaming track. And so there's, we're not specifically, saying, oh, you need to build this type of AAA game, but we try to create through the track some forcing function around like focus of teams into these verticals that we're particularly excited about. And so we evolve them over time, right? Like I think we, started with just a couple tracks, and now there's up to 6. And, we added a DePIN track, for instance, in our last hackathon, Hyperdrive. And so these things will evolve over time as we kind of see where people are building breakout startups. And so we do give some sense of direction, but not enough to be, I think, prescriptive in what people should build.
Right. And I guess maybe we can kind of back up or perhaps zoom out a bit. Your journey to this point, you ran a lot of hackathons at Solana. I mean, how did you even get into this space of running hackathons? What were you doing even before Solana? What's kind of your story behind all of this?
Yeah, so I've been in crypto quite a while. I really got into Bitcoin in college. So I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Bitcoin, and there was an interesting thing happening when I was in college where there was this mining pool called ghash.io, which was getting close, and I think they actually eclipsed over 50% of the hash rate of Bitcoin. And so that really piqued my interest. I was studying economics at the time and was really interested in.
Well, what year was this, by the way?
I wrote it in 2013 and 2014.
Oh, wow. So we had a similar story because I wrote a paper on Bitcoin in college too, 2015. It's super interesting.
Yeah. So I was interested in like Bitcoin mining and the economics of that. And so was kind of a Bitcoin maxi, honestly, for many years, until I obviously learned about Ethereum and got into this vision of having a general purpose smart contract blockchain. And so I worked at Square for after college, but I worked at a project called 0x, which is like a DEX aggregator on Ethereum for a couple years. And so really got into that, and then was kind of frustrated with the lack of progress, but also like the lack of sort of a clear vision for how Ethereum would grow into the mainstream. And so obviously there were a bunch of next generation blockchains being developed between 2017 and like 2020, and a lot of them were coming to mainnet around 2020, and obviously one of them was Solana. And so I honestly didn't follow Solana very closely during those years of like when it started in like late 2017 to 2020 when it got to mainnet. But when I did see it, it was impressive. And then Raj and some recruiters reached out to me to be their head of growth, and obviously was very impressed with the team. And the more I learned about Solana, the more I was becoming a believer. And so that's kind of how I got to, I guess initially it was the Solana Labs team, and so that's where the hackathon started. Honestly, like it was just kind of like the beginning of the ecosystem. There weren't that many developers building products. There was obviously FTX had agreed to build Serum, which was kind of like one of the first ones, and the Orca team was starting to build. But other than that, it really was sort of a blank slate, and we were thinking about like how do we non-scalably grow the ecosystem. So how do we get like a first-class wallet, or how do we get a lending protocol, which was more of a BD effort. But what I focused on was like how do we scalably bring in really talented developers and startup founders into the ecosystem. And so that was kind of the genesis of why we started running hackathons.
What were some of the, I guess, key projects that came out of these hackathons? You mentioned Tensor was one of them. Were there some others that perhaps we're overlooking?
Yeah, you can go to Colosseum.org to see a big list of them. I mean, it's been a wide range of founders who have had their start in these hackathons, from Lucas Buffalo at Jito, and the STEPN team won a hackathon, and Genoped. So like even in the gaming vertical, to the ZK initiatives in Solana, so like Elusive and Light Protocol, to a lot of the DeFi protocols like Mango, and one of the CTO of Drift started kind of Drift in one of the hackathons. And so there's been a lot. And in fact, when we ran the numbers, about 80% of all VC-backed startups in the Solana ecosystem started in the hackathons.
Really?
So a wide majority of them. So that's why I've been doubling and tripling down on this over time, because it's been pretty successful in growing the ecosystem.
That's like such an unusual stat too. I think that has no analog to like other tech industries.
Well, actually, this is interesting. So There's this notion of product market fit, but there's also this notion of like product channel or product program fit, and every product, whether it's Web 2 or Web 3, usually has sort of like a Pareto distribution of channels that are growing the product more than others. So this is how actually like Facebook went from just an organic like 1 million users to 1 billion users. They have a growth team, and that growth team was experimenting with many different channels to grow the user base, and then narrowed in on basically one or two that was driving the out by far the usage of that platform. Pinterest. There's examples of this in most tech startups that have grown to be large companies. And I think thinking through, like, if you think of L1s or L2 networks as sort of like the product, what type of program or channel would fit really well into this? And I think the hackathon kind of fits that, where you can think of something like Expedia as a counterexample, where if I want to buy a flight, it's very quick to purchase, right? Like that's why ads, like Google ads, work so well for Expedia. Someone has an intent to buy a flight, they see an ad on Google, and they click and they purchase very quickly. With an L1 blockchain, it takes weeks to convince a developer to go build a startup on the network. So how do you have an acquisition funnel for, basically providing the sales funnel of like getting people to experiment with the technology, to believing in the technology, to actually going to the point where like, hey, I'm going to start like a full-time startup and find a team to go build this product on this network. Well, that involves like 4 or 5, 6 weeks, maybe even longer. And so that's one of the reasons I think the hackathons have been a great way of getting people through that funnel, or getting people through that journey from experimentation to actually being convinced to build a startup.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about it that way. I think where I was coming from with that is if you just look historically, it's almost like, and maybe it's just kind of a more cynical view, but like startups get anointed by just being funded by certain VCs that have had a track record of producing, really like unicorns or just really positive outcome startups. And in a way, I think it's also just because like previously, we kind of talked about this earlier, hackathons just didn't necessarily produce great products that were usable. They were more like kind of really roughly put together rough drafts of random ideas. But it feels to me like you're alluding to that crypto is just fundamentally different in a way. And I think kind of building an entire organization that embraces that is kind of a powerful way to bootstrap ecosystems for L1s. And I think this template might even be replicated by other ecosystems as they emerge. So one of the things you've done during your time at Solana, and then you're going to keep doing moving forward, is just evaluating lots and lots of projects and teams at a very rapid clip, and trying to filter through this noise and find some signal. How do you do that? Like, what's your process? I mean, there's probably a lot of kind of markers there, or maybe heuristics you use to do that, right?
It's tough. To be honest, it's like really, really difficult, and it gets more and more difficult over time as these competitions have gotten larger, right? It was difficult when we ran the first hackathon and there were 60 project submissions. Mm-hmm. It's even harder when there's like close to 1,000 in our last hackathon. So this is kind of a process that we're constantly evolving. But basically how it works today is we have myself and the Solana Foundation, BD and DevRel team and other folks that will take a first look at all of the projects basically that are submitted. And then we have this huge stable of external judges. So you may have seen like, VCs or, ex-hackathon winners or founders in the ecosystem who are basically volunteering their time to go and evaluate hackathon projects. And so we basically have a short list that we create of the top couple hundred, I would say, product submissions after filtering for spam and products that just like don't really have much of a chance at winning an award. And then the judges will basically look through all of those submissions. They'll score them. They'll give us their feedback on them. We also have a separate team who's an external group of developers who are just looking through the GitHub repos and evaluating the code of and demoing the products. So that's happening in parallel. And then obviously myself and the Colosseum team will be in parallel, kind of coming to our own conclusions and looking through projects. And so it's kind of this almost parallelized process of many different groups coming together, and we basically aggregate all of the feedback both from the technical review teams and the external judges in terms of like stack ranking the winners. And so that's how we get to the winners. And then with Colosseum, it's important to know that not all winners, so usually there's like 30 to 40-ish winners if you count up all the prize track winners. We're basically saying that we're not going to invest in all of 40, but that's your door into getting an interview and to be considered for our accelerator and our pre-seed check. And so we'll do an extra layer of interviews and evaluation to choose the top 10 to 15 teams that actually get into the accelerator after the hackathon. So that's the process at a high level.
Gotcha. So the prerequisite to even be considered is being a winner in one of the tracks. So assuming you do make it through all of the hurdles in terms of interviews, remind me, what are the terms for that check?
Yeah, so it's almost a pre-seed check at this point. It's $250K, and the purpose of it is to fill sort of a gap that we've seen over the last few years, where there's so many talented builders coming out of the hackathon, but seed stage VCs and even pre-seed VCs aren't willing to underwrite a team that has been building something for a month and a half, that has not gone to mainnet, has no usage, and it's just more of an idea and some code in a repo at this point. And so we feel that we want to support founders at that stage to help them get enough capital where they can feel comfortable quitting their job, whether that be at Google or a university student or whatever, that they feel comfortable that they can go pursue this with their team, to have enough ramen money to get to the point where they can go through our accelerator, potentially get to mainnet, and then pitch obviously seed level investors to get that first true round of capital where they can start scaling the protocol or the business they're building. So that's the deal.
For sure. And I think it feels a very much needed niche. I mean, it can take months and months of just full-time focus to get to a point where you could raise actual capital from a pre-seed or seed stage VC. And that was actually the story with Tensor when we interviewed them. They won money from hackathons, and that sustained them for months on end before they kind of got to that initial release. Kind of changing gears here. The other thing I wanted to touch on, as you've sifted through, at this point, thousands and thousands of submissions, are there any ideas that stuck out to you that maybe it's like, this is like fantastic, but the timing just isn't right, or this is really kind of off the wall creative?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of honestly in the Mark Andreessen camp on this, where he says that there's actually no bad ideas. It's just like the wrong timing. And so that's a really tough thing to evaluate, whether now is the right time for this product. And there's a bunch of things that you can go through to check that. But at the end of the day, it's really difficult. I think, after looking through thousands of these product submissions, it's not clear. I think things, again, to kind of go to another analogy, is like, things start out as a toy or whatever, as Chris Dixon says. That is true. Also, like, how weird an idea is. Like, the first time I saw like STEPN, for instance, as a hackathon submission, I thought that was like the weirdest concept ever, but it exploded, shortly after the hackathon, because it opened up sort of a new market. And so that's like one of the things that we are, using in our rubric of choosing projects, is like, does this open up a novel market that couldn't have existed before without crypto? And so sometimes that can be very strange in nature. And so we do look for those like very weird and wacky ideas, because if there's some logic to it, and if it does open up some native digital market, that's definitely something that can get pretty big pretty quick. And so I think we see that across crypto a lot. So yeah, that's kind of what we look for.
Gotcha. And what about in terms of traits for, I guess, teams or the founders you're evaluating? Is it kind of similar to what, a traditional VC would look for, or are you guys looking for anything different given it's crypto, it's Solana?
Yeah, I think, yeah, going through, we do look at a little bit different things, I think, compared to like other accelerators, for instance, and this speaks to like why we run a hackathon rather than running a college style written application, is that one, like, we want to back people that have the personality trait that wants to go compete in the largest hackathon in the world. There's a lot of founders who think they're maybe like too good or something to go compete. They want to just go raise a large round of capital, or they want to get the highest valuation possible. So they're just going to go out and raise a bunch of money from a VC. That actually like tells us something about the drive and personality of someone. And so one thing is just like a forcing function of participating in the hackathon generally, is that we get a sense of like that personality trait, because things as a founder are going to go up and down. Things are going to go your way. Things are not going to go your way. And so we feel that the competitive drive is often what pushes people forward. I think I forget who said this quote, but it was, someone said that like startups don't die because of competition. They die because the founder like loses interest or like loses their competitive drive to continue on. And so that's number one. Number two is, again, like looking at how teams sort of prioritize their engineering sprint, how they work together as a co-founding team is really, really important, because that sort of exemplifies how they're going to be sprinting in future, in the future to find product market fit. And then, the product vision, right? Like, so what comes out of these hackathons is sort of equivalent to a pitch deck or a video kind of presentation of their pitch deck, where they're kind of explaining the big vision of like the market that they're going after and what they build during the hackathon that kind of helps them get to the point where they can ultimately realize that vision. And so we do think market is really important, even though we know teams are going to pivot a lot within that sort of vertical. But yeah, hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking for.
Kind of on a similar point, actually. One thing I've noticed is pre-ChatGPT, post-ChatGPT, how different the process of building stuff is. And this applies to writing code. It applies to creative endeavors, generating art, videos, etc., even text writing. And one thing I saw on Twitter, it went viral maybe a month or two ago, is I think the winner of a prominent AI hackathon out in SF had no experience writing code, just completely used these generative tools, ended up winning because she had like this insane product vision and storytelling ability. And so my question to you is, what do you think in a post ChatGPT world, like the ideal team looks like? I mean, is it all devs, or is it kind of some mixture of skill sets that maybe like to that person that won in SF just drives more of a vision, and the other stuff is kind of becomes commoditized, the execution ability of writing the actual code?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we've seen over time, and this sort of is in line with the evolution of how we structure the hackathons, is that initially the teams that were winning prizes were one or two people, and they were all technical. They were all engineers, and that's what you would think of as a hackathon, right? It's a developer-only event. The last two hackathons, Grizzlython and Hyperdrive, it's much more of a mix of skills, where there's usually at least one or two technical folks, but there's usually also someone leading the business efforts. And what's most important, I think, for us in a post ChatGPT world is like, you still have to prompt this thing to do what you want it to do. Mm-hmm. And that sort of speaks to sort of industry expertise. Like, there's product market fit, but then there's like team market fit, right? Where is this team coming from? Like, for instance, if the folks are coming from like an indie game shop, whether they're technical or not, if they're running BD for this shop or not, are they building like a Web3 game? That's a good fit, right? They have some industry expertise on the products that they think will succeed in that particular vertical. Same with like TradFi and DeFi. And so obviously there's outliers within that you have to catch, but generally having some sort of experience within a particular market, whether you're technical or not, is still going to be really important going into the future. So that's kind of one of the things we really look for at the early stage.
For sure. Yeah. The founder market fit is key. And I think especially with these emergent use cases on the deep inside, that's kind of like, do you have the eye to spot where potentially a token can create some new behaviors that can improve the product experience for users and create actual organic demand for the token? Kind of on that point, actually, how do you guys think about on the business side when you're looking at these companies? Like, are you guys looking for projects that want to do a token, for instance, or are you looking at evaluating like equity businesses and even just like jurisdictionally, US centric versus international markets, which might have more favorable crypto laws? Like, how do you think about all of that?
Yeah, so we want to support both models, and historically many of the models have been token based versus equity. There's good reasons to use equity in certain cases, and there's good reasons to use tokens in other cases. And so we don't have a particular preference of one over the other. It's more how the founder sort of thinks about their business and kind of explains why a token would be better than equity in their particular vision. So yeah, we honestly don't really have a preference there. Although having a token, and investing in teams that do have tokens does change the calculus a lot for VCs, right? Where you often get liquidity much earlier than you do with equity. And so that is a difference, and that's something that we have to, model around and figure out how we want to approach, which I think we have a good kind of template for. But yeah, it's really about what the founder believes in, and we want to back what they believe in.
For sure. And how about just broadly, what areas of crypto are you excited about? What are you trying to see potentially more teams take on as a challenge to dive into?
Man, this is really tough. I mean, I stopped having, I think, good ideas or requests for startups like 2 years ago, especially after going through so many hackathon submissions where so many people build. Like we used to, have this big list of ideas that we wanted people to build, and they would build it, and rarely did they work out. Besides like the very beginning, where there was some obvious things like Solana, for instance, like was a winner in the early hackathon. Obviously needed a borrow lend protocol. So things like that worked out, but a lot of the stuff that we wanted to see really hasn't. So I kind of don't want to tell people to build what I want to see, because maybe it's not a good idea. But I think we are good at evaluating ideas, and I think broadly, this is why we have tracks of like giving people some sort of like market or vertical to focus on. And I think right now that is DeepIn more than anything else. We've seen a lot of really interesting recent hackathon teams work on DeepIn, in addition to like stuff outside the hackathon. I think it's important to know, like, yes, a lot of teams are coming through the hackathon, but a lot of great teams are not coming through the hackathon as well. And so teams like Helium and HiveMapper are, forging a really interesting path and really interesting economic models that I don't think could have existed before. And teams are now kind of taking a lot of what they've kind of accomplished in their verticals and applying it to, so like gaming. Like there was a team in the last winner of the DeepIn track was called Shaga, and they're sort of building a network for cloud gaming that's really interesting. And then before that, there's a team called IO.net that's building sort of like an Airbnb for GPUs for AI startups. And so those are both like very interesting products, and we want to see more experimentation in our hackathons around DeepIn networks specifically. So open to everything, but DeepIn personally is like very interesting to me right now.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that's also become a space, I think, that's in a way synonymous with Solana itself. There's just, I feel like every DeepIn project at this point, or every relevant one, is on Solana. So that's super bullish for the ecosystem. What about, so something I've been seeing kind of featured in hackathons and maybe pulled back, and now it's probably back in hyperdrive, is just like mobile, whether it's on the Saga phone or not. But I think this has been a pain point for builders for the longest time. It's kind of hard to build mobile experiences. We saw this kind of meta with the PWA frenzy after Friendtech. Perhaps that's died down a little bit. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, there's some obvious stuff that people say over and over again, right? Which is like, most people use the internet on their mobile phones, right? Mobile penetration is going up around the world. More people use their phones and laptops, et cetera, et cetera. And so obviously crypto needs to go mobile at some point. How that is going to happen is difficult. I mean, obviously there's the Saga initiative and there's chapter 2 coming out. Probably going to take a while to ship those devices, but I mean, obviously there's like, I think over 100,000 that have been pre-ordered. So great distribution in the long term for app developers. So we're excited about, the future of hardware through chapter 2, and we want to see people build applications for it. But there's obviously this gap between when those devices ship and today, and that can be difficult. And so one example, not inside the Solana ecosystem, although they are integrating with Solana soon, is Farcaster, right? Like, I think Farcaster is one of the first true like breakout mobile first kind of applications that at least I've seen in crypto. And so I think there's a lot of learnings to be had from what that team has been doing, and they've gotten around a lot of the app store issues that have plagued other applications, which is tough. And startups are living day to day trying to survive and trying to find product market fit. So it's not super helpful for me to say like wait until Saga 2's ship, but it is worth kind of getting started on that path and exploring ways to sort of circumvent the system in order to get your mobile application in the hands of end users. And there's a variety of ways that can happen, and I think the Farcaster team has done a good job of doing that, so lots to learn from them.
Definitely. And it's an interesting point you brought up with Saga 2. They sold pre-orders over 100K. For context, the Apple Vision Pro is around 200,000 orders a week or so after its launch. So it's not too shabby, because I think the Saga 2 only opened up in January, right?
Yeah, I think that's like also like one thing that I haven't heard people talk about much, that's sort of analogous between the Vision Pro and the Saga, is that the type of consumer, I would say, that buys those particular devices are a lot more valuable than your average like smartphone owner. They're willing to expend money and purchase things is much higher than others. I think I don't know who was saying this. Maybe it was the Blockworks guys, but they were saying that like advertisers, for instance, are very, very interested in the crypto demographic because they have such a higher purchasing power than your average demographic. And so that's the case for app developers too, right? Like having, deploying an application to 100,000 crypto native users who are willing to spend on things like NFTs or experiment with new markets and even speculate within those markets is a lot more valuable than your average like Android user. Pretty exciting, I think, and a big opportunity for distribution for app developers in the future.
Yeah, I think Nikita Beer said a great tweet too along those lines, which is, app developers should be running for users in the Vision Pro just because they spent $3,000 on a device. Like that's kind of that's insane. That kind of and expendable or disposable income. Really, crypto is kind of the only other market where I kind of see those characteristics where people are dropping tens of thousands on PFP, for instance. And I believe there's going to be a lot of interesting applications on this next iteration of the Saga phone, and I think they'll fix a lot of the issues with the previous one. So it's super exciting. So Matty, we talked about a lot of stuff here. Maybe on a closing note or a closing question, what is your advice to builders? And perhaps we can kind of take two approaches to answering this. People that specifically want to do the hackathons that Colosseum puts out, but also maybe more broadly, just based on all the accumulated wisdom you've gotten over the years?
Yeah, I would say find. Can I back up a second?
Yeah.
Actually? Cool. So I would say the first thing is that there's a lot of great ideas in crypto that's circulating on crypto Twitter or X or whatever. And you never know, to what you alluded to earlier around timing, whether this is the right time for this product. And so you're gonna, like, when you start a new venture, like you have to basically commit quite a few years to seeing it through. And so I would say the most important thing is choosing something that's a problem that you experience and building a solution or a product that's crypto enabled that solves that problem for you, because most likely there's 100 other people just like you that have that same problem. And all you need to do as a founder is build that product for yourself and then find those people that are like you. And then that's when you get feedback from those people about how to improve it slightly, make marginal improvements, sometimes big improvements early on, or pivot it to find product market fit with the next 1,000 people, and then 100,000 people, and then 1,000,000 people, and then you're kind of off and running. And so solve a problem and build a product that you yourself would use on a consistent basis. So that's the biggest thing I tell people, because you have to keep interested. You can't have apathy after years of building. You have to keep going. And so it has to just be a personal passion of yours. So that's the biggest advice I'd give folks.
Yeah. In a way, it's like you're marrying what you're working on.
Yep.
Treat it as like that kind of decision. Almost there's a permanence to it if you want it to actually succeed and see it through. But yeah,
I think that, obviously you're going to pivot a lot.
Right.
And that's something, especially for us running these hackathons and seeing the earliest of stages of teams, they pivot a ton. But like often that starting kernel or that starting seed of why you built in the first place persists over the course of that product life cycle. And so, yeah, finding what that is and starting to iterate and build that product is the best way to get started.
Awesome. Well, great kind of wisdom there to close on. Matty, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. Really excited to see all the amazing startups that come out of Colosseum, whether it's the hackathons or the accelerator.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoy this podcast. I listen to it whenever you put out a new one. So happy
Appreciate
I could make it on it myself.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, sir. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks, Al.